we reflect on justice and injustice, as Christians, we must think about Jesus, who was served perhaps the greatest of injustices. Dragged before a summary court in the middle of the night, a man entirely innocent, he was found guilty. The trial before the Sanhedrin was a sham. Pilate and Herod did not reverse the injustice, and ultimately he was, of course, murdered on the cross. He brought love and justice. He was perfectly innocent, but injustice prevailed, at least for 3 days. Since then, many Christians have been persecuted and killed, often facing injustice with great courage. People like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, murdered by the Nazis. Others have found it too much in the face of physical threat and have renounced their faith. But if we were faced with being forced to kneel before an executioner in Iraq or Syria today, how would we react? How true to our faith would we be? There are thousands of prisoners of conscience around the world. Tohar Haydarov wasn't even allowed a lawyer when he faced the court in Uzbekistan on trumped-up drugs charges. He was a Christian minister sentenced to 10 years hard labour because he was a Christian. Such blatant injustices are horrifying. His father was even murdered on the day after the trial. So how do we cope with injustice? Well, at times we can all be guilty of thinking unjust thoughts about other people. The Lord bids us to love our neighbours and even to love our enemies. But we so often strike out at others, sometimes perhaps only in our imaginations. But it can be very difficult to forgive in the face of injustice. And I think of the man in the shack who found it so difficult to forgive the man, not surprisingly, who murdered his young daughter. Jesus tells us clearly that judgment will be passed by God on murderers, on others who break commandments, and actually even on those who use careless words. The injustice of this world was handed out to Jesus and to many Christian martyrs over the following 2,000 years. Amos writes of justice rolling down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. And Isaiah prophesies that Jesus will establish and uphold his throne with justice and with righteousness from this time onwards and forevermore. We must pray fervently that Jesus comes back to us soon to establish his kingdom on earth, full of justice and of righteousness. We must pray that God's justice will ultimately prevail.